I installed hidden cameras to catch the woman I suspected of stealing from my home and my sick son. What I captured instead shattered my understanding of good, evil, and the desperate lengths of a mother's love. The silence in my house used to be a comfort. After my wife, Clara, passed away 2 years ago, the quiet was a blanket I could wrap myself in. But lately, it had become something else entirely. It was heavy, accusatory. It felt like the silence was watching me, judging me for not noticing things sooner. It all started about 3 months after I hired Eleanor. At 29, a widower with a 7-year-old son, I was drowning. My job in finance demanded long hours, and my son, Leo, demanded everything else. Leo was my world, my entire reason for getting out of bed, but his health was fragile. A rare autoimmune disorder meant he was susceptible to every bug, every change in the weather. His life was a tightrope walk of medications, specialist appointments, and long nights spent listening to the wheeze in his chest. Hiring a live-out maid and part-time nanny seemed like the only solution. Eleanor came highly recommended. She was in her late 40s, a quiet woman from Eastern Europe with kind eyes that seemed to hold a deep sadness of their own. She was ruthlessly efficient. The house had never been cleaner. The laundry was always done, and she even cooked simple, healthy meals that Leo actually ate. For the first few weeks, she was a godsend, a port in the storm of my chaotic life. But then, things started to go missing. It was small at first, almost unnoticeable. A bottle of expensive scotch from the back of my liquor cabinet. I figured I'd misplaced it, or finished it on a particularly rough night and forgotten. I let it go. A week later, a pair of silver cufflinks, a gift from my late wife, vanished from my dresser. I tore my bedroom apart looking for them. They were irreplaceable. I asked Elena if she'd seen them while cleaning. She just looked at me with those placid dark eyes and shook her head slowly. "No, Mr. Allister. I did not see." Her accent was thick, her words clipped. I felt a prickle of suspicion, but I crushed it down. It felt ugly, accusatory. Who was I to suspect this quiet, hard-working woman? But the list grew. $100 bill I'd left on the kitchen counter for groceries. A brand new fountain pen, still in its box, from my office. Each time something disappeared, a little more of my trust eroded. I started watching her. Not overtly, but I'd find reasons to work from home, observing her from my office. She never varied from her routine. She'd clean with a meticulousness that was almost unnerving, her face a mask of concentration. She was gentle with Leo, reading to him in her soft accented English when he was too tired to play, but she kept a professional distance. There was a wall around her I couldn't seem to penetrate. The breaking point came last Tuesday. It was the one thing that turned my simmering suspicion into cold, hard certainty. Leo had a particularly bad flare-up, and the doctor prescribed a new, incredibly expensive injectable medication. It wasn't covered by insurance, and a single vial cost nearly $1,000. I kept it in the small refrigerator in my home office, away from the regular food. That night, Leo needed a dose. I went to the fridge, opened the box, and my heart stopped. There were supposed to be 3 vials inside. There were only 2. A cold dread, thick and suffocating, washed over me. It couldn't be. I counted again. 2. I searched the fridge, the desk, the floor, my mind racing. Had I miscounted when I picked it up from the pharmacy? No. I was meticulous about Leo's medicine. I knew for a fact there had been 3, the only person who had been in the house all day. The only other person with access to my office while she cleaned was Elena. Stealing my scotch was one thing. Stealing my cufflinks was infuriating. But stealing life-saving medication from my sick child, that was monstrous. That was unforgivable. My hands were shaking with rage. I wanted to storm out there, to scream at her, to call the police, but I stopped myself. I had no proof. It was my word against hers. Firing her without proof could lead to legal trouble, and accusing her could be a nightmare. No, I had to be smart. I had to catch her. That night, I ordered a set of high-definition nanny cams online, the kind that are so small you could hide them in a pen holder. They arrived the next day. I spent an hour after Elena left setting them up. One was disguised as a USB charger in my office, aimed directly at the mini-fridge. Another was in the main hallway, disguised as a smoke detector, covering the entrance to my office and Leo's bedroom. I felt a grim satisfaction as I synced the cameras to an app on my phone. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait. That night, I put Leo to bed, his breathing still a little ragged. I sat in the living room in the dark, the glow of my phone the only light, the live feed from the 2 cameras open on the screen. The hours ticked by. 10 o'clock, 11, midnight. The house was utterly still. Nothing. I started to feel foolish, a paranoid man chasing shadows. Maybe I really had lost the vial. Just as I was about to give up and go to bed, I saw it. A flicker of movement on the hallway camera. The timestamp on the screen read 12:47 a.m. My heart hammered against my ribs. A shadowy figure emerged from the direction of the back door, the one that led to the small apartment over the garage where Elena stayed 5 nights a week. It was her. She was moving with a stealth that chilled me to the bone, barefoot, clad in a simple nightgown. She didn't even glance toward my office, my brow furrowed in confusion. If she wasn't going for the valuables or the medicine, then what was she doing? She crept down the hallway, a ghost in my home, and stopped. My blood ran cold as I watched her hand, slow and deliberate, reach for the doorknob, not of my office but of Leo's room. She turned it with agonizing slowness, slipped inside, and silently closed the door behind her. I stared at the empty hallway on my screen, my mind blank with shock and a terrifying, unanswerable question. What in God's name was she doing in my sick son's room in the middle of the night? My heart wasn't just hammering, it was trying to break out of my ribcage. For a full minute I was paralyzed, my thumb frozen over the phone screen, my breath caught in my throat. Every horror story, every news report about a nanny harming a child, flashed through my mind in a sickening kaleidoscope of fear. My son was in there, sick, vulnerable, and asleep. And this woman, this thief I had let into my home, was in there with him. My body screamed at me to run, to kick the door down, to tear her away from him. But another part of me, the cold, calculating part that had set up the cameras in the first place, held me back. I had no camera in his room. If I burst in now, she could claim anything. That she heard him cough, that she was just checking on him. It would be my word against hers, again. I needed to see what she did next. The wait was the purest form of torture I have ever known. Every second that ticked by was an eternity filled with monstrous possibilities. What was she doing? Was she smothering him with a pillow? Was she injecting him with something? The silence from the room was the most terrifying sound in the world. I gripped my phone so tightly the plastic creaked in protest, my eyes glued to the static image of Leo's closed bedroom door on the screen. My muscles were coiled so tight I felt like I would snap. It was maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like 5 hours. Then, as silently as she had entered, the doorknob turned. Elena slipped back into the hallway, a phantom in the low-light vision of the camera. She pulled the door until it softly clicked shut. She didn't have anything in her hands. She didn't look triumphant or guilty. In the grainy monochrome footage, her face just looked weary, impossibly sad. She turned and padded back down the hall the way she came, disappearing from the frame. I waited until I was sure she was gone, my body shaking with a mixture of residual adrenaline and profound confusion. I practically flew down the hallway, my bare feet slapping against the cold hardwood. I eased Leo's door open, my heart in my mouth. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of his dinosaur nightlight, and there, in the middle of his bed, was Leo. He was fast asleep, his chest rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm. I rushed to his side, my hand going to his forehead. No fever. I put my ear close to his mouth. His breathing wasn't ragged or wheezy. In fact, it sounded clearer, deeper, and more peaceful than it had in days. I stood there for a long time, just watching him breathe, my mind a war zone of conflicting thoughts. He was safe. He was fine. But that didn't answer the question. It only made it bigger. The next day was surreal. Elena arrived at her usual time, her face as placid and unreadable as ever. "Good morning, Mr. Allister," she said in her quiet, formal way. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and scream, "What were you doing in my son's room?" But I just nodded, my throat tight. "Morning, Elena." I watched her all day, a hawk tracking its prey. Every time she went near Leo, my entire body tensed. But she was just normal. She brought him his juice, she read him a chapter from his favorite book about dragons, she tidied his room. It was maddening. This veneer of calm professionalism felt like a deliberate mockery. That night, I was back in my chair, watching the cameras. And just like the night before, at almost the exact same time, she appeared. The same silent, ghostly procession down the hall. The same slow turn of the doorknob. The same agonizing 5 minutes inside his room. The same quiet exit. The same peaceful, deeply sleeping son when I checked on him. It happened again the third night, and the fourth. It was a ritual. A secret nightly pilgrimage to my son's bedside. My fear began to curdle into something else. A deep, unsettling bewilderment. She wasn't harming him. If anything, he seemed to be getting better. His coughing fits during the day were less frequent. He had more energy. It made no sense. My theory was in tatters. A thief who steals valuables and medicine doesn't also act as some kind of secret, nocturnal nurse. The two narratives didn't fit. Frustrated, I decided to go back to the beginning. The missing vial. That was the one concrete thing I had. The one piece of evidence that started all of this. I opened the app on my laptop and went back to the footage from Tuesday night, the night the medication had vanished. I had been so focused on the hallway camera, waiting for her to make her move on Leo's room, that I'd barely glanced at the footage from my office. I found the timestamp from when she was cleaning my office that afternoon. I watched her dust the shelves, empty the wastebasket, run the vacuum. It was all excruciatingly normal. I fast-forwarded, my finger tapping impatiently on the trackpad. I was about to give up, to dismiss it as a dead end, and then I saw it. It was hours later, long after she should have been gone for the day. The timestamp read 9:15 p.m. The footage showed the office door creaking open. It was Elena. She crept into the room, her eyes darting around nervously, exactly like I'd pictured a thief would. My heart started to pound. This was it. The proof. I watched as she walked directly to the mini-fridge. She opened the door, her back to the camera. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath held, waiting to see her palm the vial and slip it into her pocket. But what I saw instead made the air leave my lungs in a silent gasp. She wasn't taking anything out. In her hand, she was already holding a small glass vial. I watched, utterly mesmerized, as she carefully opened the medication box and placed the missing vial back inside. My brain simply refused to process what my eyes were seeing. I replayed the footage. Once, twice, 5 times. The sequence was undeniable. Elena crept into my office, opened the fridge, and put the $1,000 vial of medication back into the box. She hadn't stolen it. She had borrowed it? I scrolled frantically through the footage from earlier that day, looking for the moment she took it. There it was. Around 3 p.m., while I was on a conference call. She had slipped into the office, taken 1 vial, and left. Then, 6 hours later, she had returned it. It was the most illogical act of theft I could possibly imagine. Why take it only to bring it back? What could she possibly have done with my son's life-saving medicine for 6 hours? The pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting together. They were actively repelling each other. A woman who steals cufflinks and scotch. A woman who secretly visits my son's room at night, after which he seems to get better. A woman who borrows a vial of incredibly expensive medication and then returns it untouched. None of it made sense. My carefully constructed image of her as a cold, calculating thief was fracturing, replaced by a complete and utter void of understanding. I felt like I was losing my mind. The next day I couldn't even look at her. I worked from my office with the door closed, my mind churning. I had to know what was happening in Leo's room. The suspense was eating me alive. That evening, after Eleanor had left for her apartment over the garage and I had tucked Leo into bed, I put my new plan into action. I had bought another camera, this one disguised as a digital clock. It was small, discreet, and perfect for a child's bedside table. I placed it on the table next to Leo's lamp, angled it towards his bed, and made sure the faint recording light was off. Then I retreated to my makeshift surveillance station in the living room and waited. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. I watched the hallway camera, my stomach in knots. At 12:51 a.m. she appeared, the same silent ghost as the nights before. She slipped into Leo's room. I immediately switched the feed to the new clock camera. The room was bathed in the dim orange glow of the dinosaur nightlight. Eleanor moved with a quiet reverence, as if she were in a church. She pulled the small chair from Leo's desk and set it beside his bed. She just sat there for a moment, watching him sleep, her expression one of profound, aching sorrow. It was the same look I saw in the mirror every morning. Then she reached into the pocket of her nightgown. My blood turned to ice. Was this it? A weapon? Poison? But she didn't pull out a syringe or a knife. She pulled out a small worn, leather-bound book and a string of dark, wooden beads. A rosary. She opened the book, and though the camera's microphone was weak, I could just make out the sound. It was a soft melodic murmur. A language I didn't recognize. Slavic, maybe. She wasn't speaking to Leo. Her head was bowed, her eyes closed. She was praying. She prayed for what must have been 10 minutes, her voice a low, continuous whisper, her fingers moving rhythmically over the beads of the rosary. When she was finished, she leaned forward. My whole body tensed. She gently took Leo's small hand in hers, lifted it to her lips, and pressed a soft kiss to his knuckles. Then she stood up, placed the chair back at the desk, and slipped out of the room as silently as she had come. I sat there, staring at my phone, my mind completely blown. I was so wrong. So profoundly, shamefully wrong. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't a thief in the way I'd thought. She was praying for him. But why? Why the secrecy? And what about the missing items? The scotch? the cufflinks, the pen, and most importantly, the medication. The prayer circle didn't explain why she took the vial and returned it. The two events felt disconnected, pieces from entirely different puzzles. I knew I couldn't just keep watching. I had to confront her. I couldn't go on living in this house with this giant, gaping mystery hanging over my head. But how? Accusing her of praying felt absurd. I decided to start with the medicine. It was the most tangible piece of evidence I had. The next morning I waited for her to arrive. I called her into my office, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I tried to keep my voice even, professional. "Elena," I began, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. "I need to ask you something." She sat, her hands folded primly in her lap, her expression as unreadable as ever. "I reviewed the security footage from my office," I said, watching her face for any flicker of a reaction. There was none. "I saw you take a vial of Leo's medication on Tuesday afternoon, and I saw you return it late that evening." For the first time since I'd met her, the placid mask shattered. Her eyes widened, not with guilt, but with sheer, unadulterated panic. Her face went pale, and her hands began to tremble in her lap. "Mr. Allister, please, I can explain." Her voice was a ragged whisper. I did not steal. I swear. I would never." "Then what were you doing, Elena?" I pressed, my voice softer than I intended. "Why would you take it?" She looked down at her shaking hands, her whole body seeming to shrink in on itself. She took a deep, shuddering breath, as if bracing herself. When she looked back up at me, her eyes were swimming with tears. "The medicine. It is kept cold, yes?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, confused. "The vial. It must stay cold or it spoils." I nodded again. "Yes, that's right." A single tear escaped and traced a path down her weathered cheek. She took another shaky breath and delivered the line that made the entire world shift on its axis. "My son," she whispered, her voice cracking with a grief so raw it was a physical presence in the room. "He has the same sickness as Leo, but his medicine. The power went out at his apartment. His refrigerator was off for hours. I was so afraid. I needed to keep it cold." The air in the office suddenly felt thin, hard to breathe. Her words hung between us, rearranging everything I thought I knew. Her son. He had the same rare, cruel disease that held my own child hostage. The same expensive medications. The same constant, gnawing fear. In that instant, she wasn't the hired help anymore. She wasn't the suspicious foreigner. She was a mother, terrified of losing her child, just like me. The pieces of the puzzle didn't just click into place, they slammed together with the force of a physical blow. "Your son," I started, my voice hoarse. "He's here, in the city?" She nodded, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "Yes. He is older, 16. He lives with my sister across town. It is why I work so much, Mr. Allister. For him, for the medicine, the insurance, it does not pay for all of it. It is never enough." My mind raced back, recontextualizing everything through this new, heartbreaking lens. The missing scotch, the cufflinks, the pen. They weren't just random acts of theft. They were desperate measures. She wasn't stealing for greed. She was selling my replaceable things to buy her son's irreplaceable time. My cufflinks for another week of medication. My scotch for a copay on a specialist visit. A knot of shame so tight it made my stomach ache formed in my gut. I had been sitting in my comfortable home, feeling sorry for myself, while this woman was engaged in a silent, desperate war for her own child's life right under my roof. "And the nightly visits?" I asked softly, already knowing the answer. "To Leo's room." A fresh wave of tears welled in her eyes. "I am so sorry. I know it was wrong. I should not have entered. But, when I look at Leo, I see my Stefan. I see his struggle. I could not sleep, knowing your boy was also in pain. I only wanted to pray for him, to ask God to watch over him, to give him the strength my Stefan needs. It was the only thing I could think to do. The only thing I have to give." The weight of my suspicion, the ugliness of how I'd viewed her, came crashing down on me. I had set up cameras to catch a monster, but I had only caught a mirror of my own desperation, my own love for my child. I felt my own eyes begin to burn. "Elena," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I stood up, walked around the desk, and knelt in front of her chair. It was a clumsy, awkward gesture, but I didn't know what else to do. I took her trembling hands in mine. "You should have told me." She shook her head, looking down at our joined hands. "How could I? To tell my employer my son has such a sickness, that I am so desperate I must sell things. You would have fired me. I would have lost this job, the apartment. I would have lost everything. I could not take that risk." She was right. In my previous state of mind, I probably would have fired her. The thought was another sharp jab of guilt. "No," I said, my voice firm. "No, you're not going to lose anything. We're going to fix this." That afternoon, I made some calls. I have friends, connections from my years in finance, people who know people. I called a friend who works for a major pharmaceutical company. I called another who runs a charitable foundation for children with rare diseases. I told them Elena's story. I told them Stefan's story. I didn't just ask for help, I demanded it. For the first time since Clara died, I felt a fire in my belly that wasn't fueled by grief or anger, but by purpose. The next day, I drove Elena to her sister's apartment. It was in a rundown part of town, a world away from my quiet, tree-lined street. Inside, I met Stefan. He was a frail boy with his mother's kind, dark eyes, tethered to an oxygen machine but with a smile that was bright and defiant. Seeing him, seeing the sparse but immaculately clean apartment, seeing the love that poured from Elena every time she looked at her son, solidified my resolve. This was not a charity case. This was family helping family. Within a week, things began to change. My friend at the foundation managed to get Stefan enrolled in a drug trial program that would cover the full cost of his medication. It was a new treatment, experimental, but it was a lifeline they never thought they'd have. I paid Elena back for the items she had sold, pressing the cash into her hands and refusing to take no for an answer. "This is an advance," I told her, "for the next 10 years of your salary." A watery smile broke through her tears. The cameras came down. The locks on my office and liquor cabinet felt absurd. The house once again became quiet. But it wasn't the heavy, accusatory silence of before. It was a comfortable, peaceful quiet. Elena still cleans my house with ruthless efficiency, but the wall between us is gone. Now, we talk. About our sons, about their progress, about our shared hopes and fears. Sometimes I come home from work and find her and Leo sitting at the kitchen table, her helping him with his homework, both of them laughing. Last night, I couldn't sleep. I walked down the hall and saw a faint light from under Leo's door. I pushed it open gently. Inside, Eleanor was sitting in the chair by his bed, just as she had been on the camera footage. But this time she wasn't alone. I was standing in the doorway. Leo wasn't asleep. He was sitting up, leaning against her side. In her hands was the familiar worn leather book. She wasn't praying silently anymore. She was reading to him, her soft, accented voice a gentle melody in the quiet room. She looked up and saw me, and her face broke into a warm, genuine smile. I didn't see a maid, or a thief, or a stranger. I saw a hero, a mother, and in that quiet, shared moment, I knew my son and I were finally, truly, no longer alone.